and my sister who comes after me is in the US, and my oldest is in Nigeria. And I'm grateful for my sisters, which tells you that I'm also the only boy. So there come a couple of interesting connections to that. Last year's keynote for this event was delivered by the Vice President of Nigeria. Yes, and that was the beginning of announcing World Awesome Day. And I'm humbled to have my chairperson for the African Board for Coaching, Consulting, and Coaching Psychologists, Dr. Mungezi, to bring us the keynote. My chair, I celebrate you, I appreciate you, sir. Thanks. Over to you, sir.
Oh, that mute button was very far. Good morning and happy birthday, Josh. I think that's probably the first thing to say. Happy birthday to you. As usual, you live in line with your name, trying to make things awesome. And you are the only person I know who actually has a day named after him. Because I didn't know St. Patrick, so. So I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. As I mentioned, I have a whole radio station here. I let the guys go on holiday for a long weekend. So essentially, I am the full production office for the radio. Just in case you want to check if I'm doing well, vugaonlineradio.co.za. It's an online radio station that, speaking of doing great things for the world, every day I wake up pretty much like you, and I suppose that's probably how we connect, is around how do we put Africa in the center of the world where it's supposed to be. And I think for me, what's always important is how you use or play your own role in understanding your own credibility, your own capability. And one of the things I'm very passionate about is media. And one of the things we picked up, and I'll share a little bit in terms of, I prepared a very small presentation. It's not small, it's huge, but I'll pick pieces from it very quickly. But from the work we've been doing at the ABCCP around this putting Africa in the center of the world where it's supposed to be, one of the questions we had to ask was, what will Africa look like in the 22nd century? And one of the things that came out of asking that question in that conference in 2016 was the radio station itself. And the intention of the radio station is really about inspiration and inspiring people. So if you want to check it out, please do. It will be in support of a good cause. One of the things that we have managed to do with it is actually have a show now that will be coming through. I'm just trying to see how I can share. I'm not a big fan of Teams. There you go. Oh, that was easier. All right, let me know if you can see the presentation. And I can't see hands and stuff, by the way, because now I have a full screen in front of me. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Cool. So as I was saying, in 2016, through the ABCCP, we came together, and the question we asked is, what would Africa look like in the 22nd century? And at first, it sounded like I'm crazy when I was asking that question. I was like, did you make a mistake? Didn't you mean like 21st? No, we're already in the 21st century. That's actually precisely the problem. The problem is that when you look at countries like China and perhaps the US as two big economies in the world, you realize they actually work with very long-term plans, even as their presidents are coming in. they are not coming in with their own agenda. They're essentially coming in with an agenda that has been set for the country, not by the president, not by the people in charge, which is a bit of a challenge for us generally on the continent, because having studied China for the last 10 years, one of the things I'm realizing is that we work a lot quite on these 5-year terms and 8-year terms. And then when somebody leaves, they leave with everything they brought. And then the new people have to start all over again, which kind of doesn't work. But the second thing that Teams does is when I move the slide, sometimes it doesn't move. Did it move? You should see something that says Nairobi 2017.
Yes, that moved.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So with all of that in mind, and especially looking at the day you are born, when Joshua, you are born also in a day, at a time when the word that I'm going to use for today is rebuild. While in general we haven't gone out of COVID, so we are still going to the post-COVID Africa, but I think the phase we are in is in a rebuild phase. And as we rebuild, I've been reflecting on, so what are some of the things that are informing how we are rebuilding and what we are rebuilding? And in Nairobi 2017, we went to create a bit of a plan that said, okay, so yeah, it's good that we want this Africa, because we came up with 3 goals, and I'll show it to you later, a few minutes from now. An Africa who is a thought leader, an Africa that's prosperous, and an Africa in peace with itself. Those were the big 3 things that we essentially came up with in 2016. In 2017, we went and we said, okay, cool. If that's the case, what would it look like? And one of the things that essentially came out of that conversation, which we dealt with in depth in 2018, was right at the bottom of all of this comes from this quote by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah around the health. It was like we could see that COVID will be happening, because when we were having this conversation in 2018, we were saying, to get to an Africa that we want to live in 100 years from now, we need to make sure that whatever else we do, we make sure that the health of our people is in the right place. So health is an integrating LDG. So LDG is a leadership development goal. So that's what we decided in Nairobi in 2017. We had a couple of LDGs. Right at the bottom of it was health and wellness. And this is the conversation that, given a lot of the mental challenges that we're experiencing right now as we rebuild, this has become even more important for us to reconnect with on this continent. At an individual level, how are we managing as far as our overall health and wellness is concerned? And somebody asked me, yeah, but what does mental health mean and all that? Because I talk quite a lot about this stuff. And I said, no, look, mental health is only really one piece. In order to talk about mental health, you first need to talk about human health, the wholeness that we are as a person, my physical, my spiritual, as well as mental health. So we need to continuously find that we are integrated as individuals. So what came out as part of the conversation was, as part of the rebuild, the concept of salutogenesis has become even more important. Last year at this time, I essentially was rebuilding my physical health, having come out of COVID, having been hospitalized for 2 weeks. It felt like 2 years. Having been hospitalized for 2 weeks, I couldn't breathe for 3 months afterwards, and I was trying to learn as a child. That was the most foundational space I've ever been in, because most of the time I'm quite inspired, I'm quite awesome, I'm quite, oh, I don't understand, why would you say I'm alive? When people would greet me, I would go like, yeah, but what do you mean I'm alive? Being alive is like only the most fundamental. You have to thrive, not just be alive. But I had to learn a very important lesson in that, which was, it's important, first of all, to have a breath. But once you have a breath, what do you do with it? And part of the journey that I'm seeing as people are rebuilding out of COVID, because I lost my mind. That's another thing that happened. I lost my mind. I didn't know how it feels like until I experienced it. Now it's it gives me a sense of empathy whenever we talk about issues of mental health. Sometimes you study these things in the books, and there are constructs that they're looking out there, but having to actually be in the space where you actually living a parallel life and living separate from yourself became quite an experience. So in rebuilding, the concept of salutogenesis has become quite important. How do we thrive, and how do we create self-efficacy? How do we create empathy, and all of these other theories that are about health and wellness, not just mental, but full wellness. So salutogenesis is continuously a concept around full wellness. And my call to everyone who is a leader today is, first of all, work towards creating salutogenesis. First for yourself, just like in the airplane where they say you have to put on a mask on yourself as the airplane is either getting into crisis or in an emergency mode. You have to put a mask on yourself before you can even put a mask on the people. So create salutogenesis, first of all, for you, because only then would you be able to help others. So what's going on that we need to be paying attention to? So in Ghana, one of the things that came out, and it's kind of being confirmed quite a lot now as we step out of COVID, is that during the last 2 years, and you'll tell me if I'm lying, but during the last 2 years, many of us were actually pushed, if we take it Maslow's hierarchy of needs, were pushed to go right to the bottom of the pyramid. Regardless of where you are and who you are, you had to first of all worry about your physiological needs. But as we rebuild, it's important to start paying attention that there is a journey to go back to your level of self-actualization and being able to use the best of who you are for the world. But it's also important to understand that's a journey. So rebuild yourself first before rebuilding communities. And then I think I'm going to skip a few because I'm going to share some of the emerging patterns that came out of that conversation. And these are the things we need to be focusing on as we rebuild. And through the ABCCP, we have a symposium coming up in the next month. Just in case you want to come through or join us online, the sixth symposium, Coaching in Africa Symposium. This is where we come up with some of these things because we get leaders and people coming together to talk and discuss. But it's not just talk. It's a symposium that is a coaching symposium. So we coach each other and we come up with stuff. It's not just presentations. And some of the stuff that came out of the dialogues of the symposium in 2018, which are very real now as we rebuild, the concept of fear and anxiety is still with us. The concept of fighting against each other about this need to be right and others to be wrong. We need to pay attention to that because that's not how the world is. In fact, I don't even talk about rightness and wrongness anymore. I talk about appropriate or not appropriate because I'm doing some interesting research on values. And what I'm learning is that only 18% of the people in any room actually share the same value as you. So what your right is actually wrong for 82% of the people. And the other thing is, are we leveraging on the young population? As we are having these conversations of coming out of COVID and rebuilding, are we taking an advantage of the fact that we are the youngest population in the world. And many across the world can see this, and they're coming into Africa to do that. Are we as Africans leveraging on it? One of the things that's coming out, for example, in one of the conversations on the radio that I've been having with leaders across the world is that many young people are feeling neglected as adults are busy trying to live their lives. And not neglected because we want to neglect them, but neglected because we are so busy focusing on our bottom line needs that we forget that they are there. Because it's not the most natural thing to do at first when you're feeling troublesome. So pause. Pay attention, first of all, to the youth around you. What are they learning? How are we enabling them to essentially take over? How are we teaching them without influencing them? Because they still need to understand the history. They still need to understand where we come from. But they probably don't need to own it as much because they need to create their own world. It's a bit of an interesting challenge there. And the whole idea of perspectives. I think we've had a whole pandemic, or let's call it an infodemic, where do you get the right information from? On this continent, one of the things that became a bit of a challenge was the idea that we needed to revisit our own knowledge systems. And for the first time, I don't know about you, but for the first time, people are talking about Africa in a very positive way, but they obviously can't say that, these guys are doing well. Yesterday, I learned, for example, that South Africa has become the hub, the mRNA hub for the world when it comes now to working with this virus. And now, obviously, Ukraine has to now be the second one. And I'm looking at those patterns, and it's fascinating. So are you owning the thought leadership? Are you owning the thought leadership of yourself as an African right now? As we rebuild, are you still working with the old patterns, or are you realizing the fact that at a systems level, there are things that are happening in the world that if you're not paying attention to, they're designed to actually make you feel small. But if you take over your media, if you take over your storytelling, if you take over your competence, we will change this world. We are the second biggest continent in the world, and everybody knows that there is power here. But it's also a complex continent. We should forget about seeking simple solutions, or easy, actually. Simple is good for complex, but easy is something else, because complex is never easy. So when it gets complex, we should be able to step back, get out of the VUCA space for a moment, and then be able to deal with the complexity through patterns. Then we need to own our identity. It's fascinating, the conversations that also say, and I always say this, and it's always fascinating when I do it, and say there is nothing like Africa. There is 54 countries. So if we work then as 54 countries together, especially now with all the emerging Africa AU border. I was presenting to AU a couple of weeks ago, partly some of this presentation, and the AU border program is fascinating. But here we are talking about xenophobia. So who's holding the story about xenophobia when the AU is having a different conversation? When we are talking about the Africa free continental trade in this instance, and talking about opening up the borders, who's driving the narrative around xenophobia, I ask. So can we own ourselves, not just as this one big thing, but also as different? When you're Nigerian and you're South African and you're Zambian and you're Algerian, these are different cultures, these are different capabilities, and that's what we're bringing into the world. Until we can own all of these clouds, the last piece there, which is the social business mindset, will suffer anyway, because what happens at business is essentially a reflection of what's happening in the personal. So as I wrap up, I think for the individual, there are lots of things that are happening there. So don't feel like you're by yourself. At first, lifestyle diseases, emotional diseases, spiritual challenges, mental challenges, physical challenges, they are there. You're not alone. Many of us are there, but we are not talking about it. And we need to create a space for people to actually own themselves, including the illnesses that we are suffering from. So that when we remove stigma from illness, we realize that it's normal. We realize that we come out of a difficult situation. And we realize that at an organizational perspective, this could have an impact through change of culture, through impacting the emotional landscape of the organization. There is nothing like an organization. There are people in the organization. And when we understand that, we can start shifting by creating a focus on individuals. And then finally, we can change communities as well through that process. Because as we create a change in terms of the behaviors, again, I've just named one of the top 50 top 40 culture champions in 2022. I don't even know how I even got there, but one thing I continuously say is there's nothing like culture. There's behaviors we agree to all the time, and then we maintain them. What behaviors are we consciously or unconsciously have agreed to in the past that we need to let go of? And what behaviors that do we need to maintain and perpetuate as individuals, as organizations, as communities that will essentially take us to where we need to get to? So I'm looking forward to 2022 already. It's been a hectic year for me. I'm traveling again. I'm scared again. A miracle happened to me because for the whole year I was quite ill. Exactly the story I'm telling now. And then, but eventually, what I climbed on top of the mountain. So you're talking about the Kilimanjaro. What was it? The mountain you climbed, Josh? So yeah. So I found myself on the Drakensberg. So that's that's only 1,200 meters, right? And I was worried because I couldn't breathe for most of the year. And then since the beginning of this year, as I did that on the 1st of January, I came down and I've been fine and fantastic and back to 2019 at least. So, but I see that as an opportunity as an individual to go back to purpose, to be thankful of life and then be able to do it. But as a community, I encourage every single one of us to find their space and say, where is my purpose going to take me in creating the Africa we want to live in? Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Mongezi. So, it's always exciting to hear, you share